If you've ever found yourself thinking, wow, I'd really love to be a homesteader and really go down that path, but I just can't because I live in an apartment or a small house with very little land. Well, then you've come across the right video because I am going to share today lots of ways that you can be a homesteader and start homesteading no matter if you're in an apartment, small space, whatever you have. This video will definitely have timestamps so you can skip around and find information that you'd really like to look into more. This is not something that I want to be a fad or a trend, but a real lifestyle that I think could be so helpful to so many. So hello everyone, and if you're new to this channel, then my name is Catherine. I make content all about homesteading, homemaking, and just journeying to a slower, more simple, and more natural life. I do everything from showing my day-to-day life, having sit-down chats with more information like this, and overall just sharing things to help you live a little bit more slow and simple. A little over a year ago, I actually made a video very similar to this called How to Homestead in an Apartment, and you can definitely click and watch that one too if you'd like to. But if you've seen it, basically I will be going over a lot of similar tips. I just figured with me being on this platform for a little bit longer now, as well as just more experience and knowledge for myself, it could be a good idea to give that video a little bit of an update. So here I am. So I am not just speaking of this in theory, I have done this myself. I lived in an apartment for a few years and was managing to homestead to the best of my capacity there. And now I live in a suburb home, so I have about 80 by 78 square feet of a front yard to kind of use to my liking, as well as obviously the home. And I definitely call myself and consider myself a homesteader. So first, let's do just a little introduction in case you don't really know what this whole homesteading thing is. Homesteading kind of comes from the Homesteading Act, which was signed by President Lincoln in 1862. And what this basically was it gave people land for free, but under the condition that they would work that land. So that's kind of where the word homesteading comes from. And there's been other movements of homesteaders throughout the years. For example, there was a big push kind of for that lifestyle around the 60s, but definitely it is circulating again in our modern era, having the term being used on social media very often on places like TikTok, Instagram, of course, YouTube. And they definitely tie in with other terms we use also, like ranch lifestyle or country lifestyle, cottagecore even. But how people kind of think of the term homesteading nowadays is the thought of wanting to live more sustainably, more self-sufficiently, wanting to kind of get away from hustle and bustle life and be able to have better food security and things like that. In my personal opinion, this is something that should not be gatekept. We should not be telling people if they are or are not homesteaders or homesteading enough, but to encourage all people to look down these routes of thinking a little bit more in these ways. And we should know that it's something that can look really different from person to person. It doesn't have to look like the person living on the 100-acre cattle ranch or the person living in the middle of the woods with no septic or electricity. Although those people and those things definitely are homesteading too, but it's so much more than that, and it's so much more inclusive than that. And so that's why I want to show you and inspire you in this video how you can really start making those changes no matter what. Before we jump into the specific tips, I do want to cover just a little bit about what I think you should do on a mental level, which is, of course, not comparing yourself to others. Of course, this topic can be talked about in all areas online. There's such a kind of toxic comparison that can happen, which I feel is more prevalent than ever before, considering social media and people pushing things on social media is way more than in days past, where of course there'd be comparison to movie stars and celebrities, but it was not as easily as accessible. Whereas now we can see the best of everybody online at any time. So really quickly, one, just know that nothing will make you happy if you have the land you want and the gardens you want and the animals you want. If you're not happy just with yourself and with life in general, those things are not going to bring the happiness. And two, people of course post the best online, and I don't necessarily ridicule them for that, but just know that things are a lot deeper than they may seem. And also, this is a good time to practice patience. And what I mean by that is if you're like me and want to expand on your operation in the future when you have the means to, don't feel sad and discouraged because you're not able to now. It's just really important to take this time to really learn what you can under the circumstances of today. If I was just given a, let's say, 10-acre plot uh, at the beginning of this journey, sure, I might figure it out, but it's most likely that I'm going to feel overwhelmed and possibly even not want to do as much because it's just too, I'm not ready for that. So, no matter your circumstance now, if you have big dreams, great. I have huge dreams too, unrealistic dreams sometimes. But don't let that make you feel sad about the right now. Let you feel inspired in the right now. Because right now you are training, you're making the most of your current situation, and maybe things will change a little bit. Maybe your goals will shift slightly. This is your time to just really explore. And lastly, when it comes to comparison as well, don't feel like you have to want the big things. We're talking about patience for wanting bigger things, but if you're somebody that really enjoys living in a city, let's say, and enjoys some of the things that modern conveniences offer, don't feel isolated because of that. As I was mentioning in the beginning, you don't have to be the person on the ranch or in the woods, but you also don't even have to be the person wanting to be closer to that. You can be the person that is very happy with city life, more modern conveniences, but still take steps to make the changes that are important. So don't feel the pressure that if you call yourself a homesteader that you need to want to have cows and pigs and, hundreds of acres. That doesn't have to be you. Okay, let's actually jump into the tips because that's probably the biggest thing you were hoping to hear. So I have a few categories. This first category is things that you can directly do in an apartment space. And what I mean by that is you don't have to leave the apartment, you don't have to go anywhere. If you have any kind of dwelling at all, you can incorporate these steps. One, let's talk about all the ways that you can raise produce in an apartment setting. If you have any kind of balcony at all, of course, you can put pots of plants out there. I am not an expert on container gardening, but there are people that have so much knowledge, so I would really research all about container gardening and really looking into that because you can really do a lot in a little space. Even if you don't have any kind of patio at all, you're just stuck inside, you can put things in the windowsill, even if that's just herbs. Growing a little bit of herbs for your kitchen and to use in your cooking is a great place to start. If you're really passionate and have a little bit to invest up front, you can set up areas of indoor growing using things like grow light setups, as well as hydroponics is really popular. You can buy hydroponic systems, but it's also something to DIY. And I think that is super, super cool. Commonly people do lettuces, herbs, but I've seen tomatoes growing indoors from hydroponic systems. So there is a lot of potential there if you're willing to go that route. And although not a produce item particularly, mushrooms are easy to grow in spaces of all kinds. There's kits you can get online if you want to do it that way. You can also just buy spores and make your own DIY little mushroom bags. That's actually something I want to do because I've actually never done it before. But you essentially hang these bags in dark areas and mushrooms grow out of it and you can harvest yourself some mushrooms. Kind of in the same category as the gardening, you can have compost. And yes, you can have it inside of an apartment. And I'm not talking about compost services, although if that's something local to you, you can do that too. You can save some compost. Even if it's just a little bit, you can put it in the freezer if you think it's gonna start smelling bad. And then some cities have places to bring your compost to or even put it outside, I think. But if you have the space in your apartment to have a worm compost bin, then you're not gonna necessarily worry about smell. As long as you have the right balance of greens and browns, the worms will really take care of it all. And then you can add that worm compost to your plants, whether it be just house plants or if you are going down the route of growing plants indoors or on a patio. It just is so helpful, and then it helps you to feel less wasteful because you are being less wasteful with your discards of food. You may be surprised, but I actually have a couple recommendations for animals for an apartment homestead. So again, if you have a balcony, you can utilize this, but even if you don't, quail is a great place for starting with eggs or even meat if you go down that route. They are super small little birds, and they're not as tame as chickens. I've seen people keep them in tanks like you would for like fish or reptiles. Of course, do the research on how to make it a nice little habitat for them, but you can keep them inside like pets in that capacity, or if, like I said, if you have a patio area, you can keep them outside in some kind of enclosure as well. Their eggs are tiny, and they are tiny, so you won't get much eggs or meat from them necessarily, but it does add up over time. And with them being so small, you can keep quite a few in a small space. And they're not really loud or anything like that, so you shouldn't have to worry about any complaints or anybody necessarily noticing that they're there. And my second recommendation is rabbits. And rabbits can have multiple purposes as well. If you're more down the route of pets and maybe less of a meat route, then Angora rabbits are wonderful. I myself had an Angora rabbit, and she was adorable and lovely, and I could use her fiber to spin yarn. So if you're interested in natural clothing or just fabrics or knitting, crocheting, anything like that, that is a great route to start going on if you're in an apartment, because pet rabbits are not uncommon and most places allow such things. And when you have an animal that has such a luxurious fur, you can really take that time to start learning how to spin yarn, how to shear an animal. It's very, very cool. Alternatively, rabbits are definitely a common homestead meat animal, and you can do this in an apartment setting. They breed very quickly and also grow out very quickly. So if that's something you wanted to do, you definitely could for some meat security. And kind of miscellaneous for things you can do directly in your apartment, there's a lot of things you could really do. For the most part, it is really helping to hone in some certain skills. So we talked a little bit about knitting, crocheting, you can start sewing. Those are all things that can help you be a little more sustainable because you could make your own clothes or repair clothes. Cooking from scratch is a huge one. If you're not already somebody who has a lot of skills or knowledge in the kitchen, you buy a lot of pre-made things or takeout. This is just a time to hone in recipes. Maybe buy some recipe books, watch some recipe videos, just start changing your lifestyle a little bit to make time for you to actually prepare a home-cooked meal opposed to the other options. Same with herbal medicine. If you don't know much about herbal medicine, maybe you're still super into the pharmaceutical medicines, but would like to know a little bit more about natural remedies, there's lots of books to read up on. You can definitely buy herbs if you need to, buy these elements and start making tinctures in your home. Just overall, it's a huge time to learn, and you can take different classes online of things you're interested in. You can just read a lot. And these last two involve the home, but also start involving going out into your local area, which will be the next category. But if you have the means and space, consider getting a chest freezer of some sort. But don't feel weird about it. Of course, there's probably not like a good space for a chest freezer in an apartment, but if there's any space at all and you have the means and financial ability to do so, it could be really helpful, because I know apartment freezers can be quite small, and if that's what you have to work with, that's fine. But me personally, for food preservation purposes and just being able to have more options when it comes to things like meat, for example, I really enjoy having a chest freezer. And lastly, that you can do at home is start canning, and that's one of those skills. But don't feel like you need to wait till you're growing stuff to start canning. You can can farmers market food. You can can normal grocery store food. There's many different types of canners. There's canners you put on the stovetop, and I personally have a canner that is an electric canner, so I don't even have to tend it. And that works really well for me in my situation right now because I don't need a huge one to can a whole lot at once necessarily. It's more convenient for me to have one I don't have to tend to and be able to go do other things. But just starting to learn all those different skills and things that we're starting to kind of become lost art forms in a way, but I'm really seeing a resurge of them coming back, and that's so exciting. My next category is things that you can find in your local community to help you do your homesteading. So, say for example, you don't have a patio and you really want to start gardening, but it's just not feasible to do any of the indoor setups, and you also just really want to do outdoor gardening. I'm going to run down a few different options that you could think of. One, do you have a friend, a nice neighbor, a family member of any kind that would have some space, some lawn space, that they would perhaps allow you to garden there? Maybe for the exchange of some of the produce, maybe for the exchange of keeping up with some of their flower gardens, perhaps, maybe out of the kindness of their hearts, or maybe they'd even just rent you the space. Don't be afraid to ask these things. When I lived in the apartment that I lived in, someone very close to me lived in a home just a little bit away, but they owned land on a property that was maybe a 5-minute drive from the apartment. And the home wasn't livable. There was no running water or anything there. So I literally filled up gallons and gallons of buckets, put it in the back of my van, and would drive over to be able to water my garden that was over there. I had space to set up a nice garden. It did really well. I got quite a bit of tomatoes and broccoli and really nice stuff. Was it hard and kind of messy because water would splash all over my car? Absolutely. But at that time, that was the only real feasible way that I was going to have a bigger outdoor garden. And so I really chose to do whatever I could to make it work. So perhaps there is something that you could do, whether it be kind of inconvenient, but if it's really something that you're passionate about, by all means, see what you can do. If that doesn't work out, check locally, because a lot of areas, especially more popular city areas, have community garden spots. And what that is typically you almost rent a plot in a big area where lots of people have rented a certain amount of space to be able to garden in it. And of course, it's not going to be, probably as nice as your own kind of private area, but you'll probably meet a lot of like-minded people, really nice people, and you'll have an excuse to get out in the fresh air, under the sun, and garden. It'll be a great learning opportunity. And like I've said, you can grow a good amount of food in smaller spaces. I've grown about 2 months worth of tomato products from like two regular sized beds. So anything you can get, I would definitely try to get. If there's not community garden plots, see if there's a garden club. A lot of places have a garden club, and maybe you won't get to, choose exactly what you grow, but if you just have an interest in learning gardening and some of the things around that, some of the skills and maybe the science, then that's an amazing option. From what I've seen, a lot of the garden clubs too are usually very nice older women, and it's great to have people that you can kind of see as mentors or just nice people. And usually they do a lot of community work too, helping maybe local businesses or library gardens, things like that, and helping them to stay nice. And so what a great way to learn while also giving back. Now, outside of gardening, you can also see what's out there for areas to forage and also areas to hunt. Kind of same as with gardening. Ask your family, friends, neighbors, people like that. Don't be afraid if you see maybe apple trees or berry bushes that seem like nobody's picking them. Don't be afraid to ask if you can pick them, or maybe even pick some for them. You never know. It could be somebody that doesn't really care, or it could be somebody that's elderly, can't get out there anymore. Basically, just don't be afraid to make those connections and take those chances. I know in the state I live in, we have lots of public land as well, and so that's really great for wanting to forage. You can go forage fiddleheads, mushrooms, any other wild growing herb, or just all those good things. Of course, be very careful when you are starting to forage for the first time. as there are poisonous lookalikes to many things. But if you are studying on herbalism and foraging, then definitely go see what is out there. And same with hunting. You can get your hunting license. Usually you can do it online in most states or take some classes. And although it can be expensive, of course, which a lot of people don't talk about, but with the gear and the licenses, it's not free meat by any means, but it definitely is locally sourced and just great meat that you can provide. And with that, you get a large quantity at once that you can store up for the winter. So that is definitely a great option too. Next, I definitely want to talk about outsourcing some things. And people might think that if you're outsourcing all these things, are you really homesteading? And I would argue yes, because homesteading is really about that mindset. And we really need to look more on thinking about community sufficiency over self-sufficiency, because realistically, can somebody completely be self-sufficient? Yes, but they're probably not thriving. They're probably not as happy as they could be even. And also, when you're completely self-sufficient, you're not giving back. And that is so important, to give back to other people and to your community. So things that you can't feasibly do or even want to do, it's really great to outsource that and have people, real local people, do those things for you and be able to provide for you in that way while you provide for them monetarily, most likely. Bartering and trading is also a great option. But one, I'd say try to do farmers markets over grocery stores when you can. When it's that right season, oftentimes it's not even that much more expensive, especially if you're comparing, say, organic in the store to farmers market. Finding local farms and going directly to the farms to get food too. A lot of places have farm stands, but not everybody is super good at marketing. So I would recommend checking Facebook for local farms near where you live and seeing if you can go there sometimes to get some of your produce or meat or cheese or milk or whatever it may be. Maybe nothing like that is close to you, but a lot of grocery stores do have some local options or closer to local options. So try opting for some of those instead, perhaps. Just anything you can do to really put the money back into, real community members' hands, as well as diminishing that excess of transportation. Things come from all over the place on all kinds of vehicles to get to stores. So anything you can do to really make it more of a tight-knit situation is great. Lastly, I just want to kind of give a big list of just some ideas of some skills or topics of interest that you may have to go ahead and learn and dive deeper into. I don't know about you, but I love learning about new things. So I love to get kind of lists of cool topics that I can research and dive further into. So of course, gardening, permaculture, composting, foraging, herbalism, beekeeping, animal husbandry, hunting and or firearms in general, butchering, cooking from scratch, canning, sewing, knitting, crocheting, fiber spinning, woodworking, tools, how to build things, running a business, sustainable companies, soap making, researching typical ingredients and products, solar, hydroponics. The list really goes on and on and on, and I could keep going, but that is a big list. So what do I hope you can take away from this video? If nothing else, I really hope that you realize that you can do anything and you can make progress no matter your current circumstances. And in fact, it is great to be in your current circumstances because that means you have so much opportunity to learn and grow. So if you possibly want to learn more, see my personal journey and just things that I learn along the way and want to share with you, please consider subscribing so that you can join this community of like-minded folk. I put out a new video every Monday right now, and it's always about something related to homesteading or homemaking or just my life trying to live slow and simple and natural, and how you can too. But with that, I do hope to see you in the next one. Bye-bye!